Time for Season 2.
Season 2 of the Strange, Rare, and Peculiar podcast, a place to learn more about homeopathy, deepening your knowledge, expanding your universe of possibility in the world of health and well-being through homeopathy.
Homeo what?
Homeo what?
Well, that's a good thing because it's good morning, good evening, and good afternoon.
It is indeed. Here we are.
I know.
We are here again. But we're back in the spot where we prefer to record, in your office, which I like.
Right.
I do.
Along with the chainsaws, the trucks.
My gosh, why is the world so noisy?
It is relentless.
Do you think it's because I spend a lot of time with noise-canceling headphones? Or maybe it's because of that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh,
anyway, it's been a couple of weeks off for us.
We took a 2-week staycation, which was actually referred to as a catch-upcation, which for the first week was a workcation, which really made it very similar to a regular week, except it was hot.
So I find myself quite sleepy.
By the second week...
I'm tired.
You're tired and you just got up. By the second week, actually... It was really good. And I think a catch-upcation is important.
I think so, and I've noticed that you have a renewed vigor and inspiration.
I do. I'm really excited about back to school.
Wow.
It's my favorite time of the year. I don't like summer. I don't like the heat.
Right.
Yeah. It's like, it's not my season. I'm more of an autumn sweater and new pencil kind of a gal.
You don't mean perspiration, you mean...
Oh, yeah.
Jersey.
Jumper. Yeah, jumper. A jumper. I apologize. No, this is not about perspiration. Ew. Oh, my goodness. What are we going to talk about today?
Well, I've been noticing a number of things. The first is that whenever I say, hi, honey, we've got to do this, or can you read this, or you've got your earbuds in.
Yeah.
And you go, what? And then I look at your device and you're listening to someone who's, I'm going to say, groomed, very well groomed, usually male, groomed.
Oh, I know who you're thinking of.
And talking about note-taking, information management, calendars, and systems. Mm-hmm. And I've been asking myself, where's Denise? I want my wife back. So, who are you and what's happening?
Well, it's still me. I'm definitely like a note-taking nerd and an organization nerd. But it comes from. Okay, so I want to start it from the place of learning to be a homeopath or becoming a homeopath, and I think we sort of have to be engaged in some nerdy activities in order to do this job.
You mean the job predisposes one to nerdiness?
Yeah, and the inverse.
Right.
Nerds make good homeopaths.
Oh.
Nerd people unite.
Okay.
Because, you often talk about the skills and attributes of a homeopath, and you talk about it a lot from being a good listener and the empathetic standpoint. And I think that those things are, obviously at the core of, they're sort of the soul of the homeopath, right? You really can't, why would you want to do this job if you didn't have the desire, the capacity to sit in the face of another person suffering? Like, it wouldn't last long. Yeah, because that is, right, that's the experience. But there's another side to it, and I was thinking about it from the standpoint of, do you remember that talk that I did at the JHC in it was pre-pandemic, maybe 2019, it was when there was the one on brain health. The whole theme of the conference was on brain health. And I did my talk through the lens of Hahnemann as a polymath. Do you remember that? And then part of sort of getting to the understanding of Hahnemann as a polymath was to look at other polymaths through history. So in that, I talked about Isaac Newton. It was kind of like the prelude to getting people ready for some of the work on Newton. Anyway, I was thinking about that when we were preparing for today's podcast because, come August and early September before we start back to school, I'm kind of getting myself ready and in the mindset of how do we help these new people who come through our doors to learn homeopathy and so that they can be successful when they graduate. And I think the first year of studying homeopathy is one where there's a lot of personal transformation that happens, right? I mean, and I think we as a community in homeopathy, we spend a lot of time talking about that. Like we really do address what it means to sort of change within ourselves as we take on the mantle of being a homeopath. Right? Do you think so? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think this kind of goes to what you were saying about how, when you talk about the skills and attributes of a good homeopath, right?
Knowledge, skills, and attributes. Yeah.
Okay. So I've been thinking about it in a slightly different way. Well, I mean, I think we always do. We always come to this in the beginning, which is how do we help people manage the information that comes at them and not feel overwhelmed. Yeah. And so I think that part of my preparation, my personal preparation for September, which I do every year, I think this year I've just done it with a little bit more consciousness around how my preparation is very similar to the students' preparation. Do you do that in a conscious way?
No.
No?
No.
I do. And I think for the last 4 years, because I was in graduate school, it was a little bit of a different experience in that, or actually, maybe it's coming into consciousness because every September I was preparing as a student and as a teacher. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so every year was like, oh my gosh, how do I manage? I mean, sometimes I would get these dumps, we've talked about this on the podcast, I think, the amount of information that I would get every week in my, in my program and how to organize that. And so that was all well and good, except that now this year, I've just been thinking about it as how do homeopaths do this? Because it's actually different. It's similar and different. But homeopaths are expected to be polymaths.
Explain.
Well, a polymath is a person who doesn't have one sort of linear range of expertise. And it comes from a more ancient idea of the acquisition of knowledge. Somebody like Da Vinci is a really good example, right? Leonardo da Vinci.
Si.
We're going to Florence. We have to think about Da Vinci. Anyway, but, if you think about Da Vinci, he was not just a painter, but he was a mathematician. He was an inventor. He was thinking about how to decode ideas. You think about the proportions of the human body, right? So if you think about a painter and how a painter, a figure painter, right? One of the things that you learn are the proportions of the human body in order to be able to replicate it. And it's like, okay, well, you learn those proportions and it's really good for making a painting where the person doesn't look like they have a giant head and, and T-Rex arms or something. Yeah. But you've got those appropriate proportions. Well, they're part of a universal pattern. And so polymaths are tapped into all these different inputs that allow them to make connections that build a higher base of knowledge so that you can problem solve in a way that's not linear, but rather interconnected. Do you follow?
Yeah, I'm thinking about some of my building projects outside.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I just took a sip of coffee as you said that, and my whole world flashed in front of me. Please, do go on with this example.
Well, because the way that I would describe that or interpret that in my own way is that if I'm building a structure for your kiln, then, because I don't know anything about building, what I'm doing is solving a series of problems on a continuous basis.
Right.
And, I've got a set of tools, which are linear reductionistic tools, but at the end of the day, those problems are unforeseen challenges are unforeseen. And so that's my experience of creating something, is kind of endless responses to challenges and problems. Yeah.
I like that. This is the year anniversary of the kiln arriving 6 weeks earlier than it was expected to, and it needed a house, and you had to build it.
Then I got crushed underneath it.
I still have PTSD about that. One day I was in my studio, so my pottery studio and the kiln house are sort of back to back with one another. And one day I was in my studio and I had music on, and during a lull in the music I heard, I was like, oh my gosh. And I go running in, and Al was pinned under a giant piece of plywood.
Yes.
But I think, okay, I followed the example. I like the story, not the part of you getting crushed, but I mean, I like the example that you're using of all the inputs that you need for problem solving. I think it's even a little bit bigger than that in a way, right? Because, okay, so in a way, actually, I like this example because you're tapping into something I was thinking about, which is, in today's world, I think one of the things that makes it difficult in becoming a homeopath is that in today's world, people are asked to specialize in things. Think about the medical system. I mean, the medical system is a perfect example of how we moved away from whole systems healing into reductionistic, very linear ways of doing.
There are lots to know about toes and toenails and dentistry and...
Yeah. You know about the time that I had a client, it was a kid that had these weird, all of a sudden when he was 3 years old, his fingernails and toenails, so all 20 digits, the nails went from being like a regular fingernail to looking like a clamshell, all 20 of them.
Whoa.
And it turns out that there is a specialist in the Children's Hospital here.
On clamshell toes?
Well, on nails.
Nails. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah. I mean, understanding the arc of history and science and the Industrial Revolution, I can see how that was natural, that medical science would go in that direction.
It almost had
to go in that direction.
Right, and the part of the problem with it is that the infrastructure around it, in other words, the buildings and the machines, are super expensive. And so then you get people who are not the great thinkers, but the implementers, and then the people who are responsible for maintaining sort of the organizational health, not the health of the the individuals that need to be served by it. And they're thinking about, well, how do we maximize productivity and how do we maximize the monetary gains from it? So we better use this MRI machine, or, so how is somebody, for example, going to weigh the difference between the sort of the impact of multiple, MRI experiences, the impact of radioactivity on, well, this is my diagnostic protocol, right? So anyway, what has happened is in this reductionistic model in medicine, it's built around the end stage, right? It's built around the dead part. I remember when I was a student, the late Eric Summerman, he said, there's vitalism, study of life, and then there's necrology, which is what modern medicine is often about, which is the study of the dead part or the dying part. And that dead or dying part is often separate from the whole organism. Think about last summer, right? Last summer, for those of you, the toe, we're going back to toe time, capital T, toe, we think was bitten by a brown recluse spider, although there's been no sort of etiological concurrence in the medical system. But it was unbelievable, and I got septic, so I had a systemic problem. But the person who was my main provider was a podiatrist. Yeah, infectious disease was involved. Yeah, there was the general medical interventions for all the IVs and all that stuff, because I was really in a bad way, sick. Shortened, just since we're talking about homeopathy. I mean, they were shocked that I was out of the hospital early on the third day. What did they say, like 10 days to 2 weeks and going home? 2 weeks. They thought I'd be there for 2 weeks and going home with a port for long-term IV. And so somehow I managed to get out of it. But it was a really interesting sort of experience of a system that is very much reductionistically oriented, which is okay. I mean, actually, it's probably really good for somebody who is in a reductionistic mindset to work in that way. But we need whole healing. We need a whole holistic view, right?
We, as in homeopaths?
As in the world, right, of health. And we've moved away from that. And I think part of how we've moved away from it has to do with just the systems. So if we go back, right, so that's sort of where we've ended up. But if we go back to the polymath idea, what do you even do with that if you work within the medical system? If the implementation strategies are more reductionistic paradigms?
Well, it's like putting I don't know. It's totally wrong. Because for the medical system, the way it is, you need a series of technicians.
Right.
Yeah, and trained technicians. And that's it. That's what physicians... But then you have these big organizations that are built around it. So think about something like pandas, pans and pandas. What is the medical system going to do with that? Who's responsible, right? Is it, because we know that in many of the cases there's, the staphylococcus connection or streptococcus. Staphylococcus, sorry. No, streptococcus, sorry. I'm having a moment. It's not early. I'm just having a moment. Anyway, but, so what happens? Is it infectious disease? Yeah.
Well, then they give antibiotics. Well, then you've got a gut biome problem. But is it digestive? No. But you've got food restrictions. You've got anxiety. Is it mental and emotional and behavioral? But what about the larger problem of something that might have an acute infectious origin that results in a chronic, amplification over time? I mean, and I mean this seriously, not as like, well, homeopaths can do this, but I mean, I'm thinking about this as like a real logistical problem in the medical world, right? Okay, so now we go back to, we're coming on September where homeopathy students are going to start their training. Like, how do you not blow someone's circuits if you try to solve that problem on day one?
Yeah, there's no way.
You have to inspire for that, but you really have to learn how to be in places of uncertainty, right? You have to learn how to be linear in that a homeopath is expected to solve linear equations. If a person has a cough, you need to understand the remedies and the modalities, right? And the expressions of cough. Okay, fine. But you also have to learn how that cough might be connected to a deeper chronic issue, right? Does this make sense?
It makes perfect sense. I don't really have much to contribute because all I can think of is I really, really need to read the book, if it exists, called Educating Polymaths. Or
well, you should write it.
Right.
And you could start with the Zettelkasten system for note-taking.
Right. Tell us about the Zettelkasten system.
It's actually...
Isn't that something to do with fly fishing?
No.
Oh, it's not.
But it could make for a really nice thing. It's basically a really simple system that was invented by a 19th century German guy who read a lot and took his notes on index cards like we do. But it's kind of having a resurgence because it's about making connections between individual single thoughts. So, and this is what's really important. And I think this is what's got me thinking is that if you're thinking like a polymath, you can't get there in a top-down system because reductionistic ideology creates boundaries between disciplines. It has to, right? And so we've got to teach people to go beyond that, to be able to create pathways for remembering. I mean, and this is what our program is built around, right? We start with very basic systems. We get people going with learning the really foundational materials. How do homeopaths engage in acute prescribing? Along that line, we say, what is the context of the modern homeopath? And what is the historical context? And how did that evolve over time? And then we say, okay, well, what are the tools that a homeopath uses? What's a repertory? What's a materia medica? Within each of those, okay, well, how did a repertory evolve? Why are there different ones? How do you use them and why? How did different materia medicas evolve over time, right? And so what you're doing along those lines is you're creating, hopefully not confusion, but connectors, right, between things. So, to become a homeopath, to really take on this, like, the mantle of homeopath or polymath, you sort of have to learn all the individual skills, but you have to be able to braid all of that together as the complexity mounts as you get into dealing with complex chronic cases.
That's where that's kind of where I find myself, because if I'm taking a chronic case,
right,
and if I'm observing myself as I go about the business, then I am not working in a linear fashion at all. I'm using all sorts of triggers and observations to gather my information, ask the questions, and in my analysis, it's not chaotic in any way at all. But because there's a logic to what I'm doing, but it's not always in a straight line. The logic, when I say logic, I mean the more reductionistic parts of me get employed in acute prescribing.
Yes.
What's the problem?
Yep.
Classify the symptoms. What's the best match? You choose your rubrics. What's the best match? Out the door. Right?
Yep.
And there's
15 minutes.
A replicability in that.
Yep.
But I'm thinking, and it's really interesting to just reflect on this, really, that those skills are somewhat useful in some instances, in some chronic cases, but definitely not all. And I think that's what you're saying, isn't it?
Yep.
Is that level of complexity requires a different approach. And then because we're both a little geeky and a little educationally minded, then the question becomes, well, how do you teach that?
Right.
Right?
Because sometimes people get locked into things and they say, okay, but this is how we do it.
So we should be getting all of our students to write poetry.
Absolutely. That's one of the things I love about Jeremy Sher's syphilis book, where it's poetry on one side and prose on the other.
Yeah.
And, even though I know some people find it really hard to sort of grok, but I get where he was going with it, right? The idea is that our brains have to think in different ways because we, in homeopathy, there are some of us that tend toward the linear, there are some of us that tend toward the abstract. But at the end of the day, you're required to do both.
Right.
And we have to build connections within people's minds to be able to do both. So you've got to bring the linear people along to expand their minds, and you have to pull the abstract thinkers back so that they're grounded in process.
Yeah.
And there has to be, because it's education, there has to be reproducibility in order to get consistent outcomes, as consistent as you can be in homeopathy. Yeah. It's a heavy lift.
It is a heavy lift.
Yeah. And so part of that, because I've been really...
How do you run a school with that kind of...
Very carefully. And with humor and a lot of snacks.
Oh, my
But this
goodness.
is the thing, is that... And this is why, students have moments of anxiety around learning this.
Yeah.
And I think it's our job as educators to help establish trust that we can get people there, but there are times when you might feel like you're walking over the abyss because you can't put all these pieces together at one time. You can't, There's one more thing, because when we were talking about sort of the way that we've created our program, right? So year one, the other decision that we've made that I think helps in this polymath training is that people start chronic clinic right away. And in fact, you're going to chronic clinic and you're seeing the end game even before, you've had...
I was going to ask, how do you reconcile that? Because if cooking you and I had a moment in the kitchen yesterday, right? Actually, two.
Which one?
Two. Because you asked me to do something with the eggs.
Oh, yeah.
And then I've got... if you've got 25 skills, I have
French-styled shirred eggs.
Yeah, you wanted scrambled eggs. I thought you wanted an omelette, so I just went zhuzh like that with the thing. And then,
I took back the spatula.
Yeah, you grab the spatula, and the same way that you've got this way of folding the spaghetti, right? And folding everything so that everything gets coated. If I describe that...
silky...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how to do that.
You were doing fine. You just have to practice.
But I don't want to practice.
You have to.
But there's my point. Because if your way of creating your scrambled eggs requires practice and repetition, then what we're doing is we're saying, here's acute prescribing, folks, and now you're in chronic clinic.
Yeah.
Here's acute prescribing. We're in the classroom, acute, and then getting into acute homeopathy, but every day. But our students are actually seeing the end game.
They're seeing the end game. It's like saying you want to master French cuisine, but you've never been to a restaurant.
But you've never seen a whisk.
A whisk, yeah. It's really important. And the other thing is, because you've got to, we want to lock things down in our minds, right? This is how you do it. Because that normalizes the chaos, or it gives us a feeling of safety, right? We mitigate anxiety by previewing, doing, and reviewing. Well, what happens when you minimize anxiety by previewing, doing, and reviewing? That's new for you?
Pray continue.
If you can see Alastair's face, he's like looking to the side, like this is a novel concept. Yeah, like if you've got a person who's afraid, you say, well, this is what's going to happen. Now we're going to do it together. And look, you did it.
That's cognitive behavioral therapy.
Okay, it's also preview, do, and review. It's like see one, do one, teach one, right? It's the same idea. And I think in homeopathy school, there's something about the repetition of process, right? That when you have that, you have to do something enough times that it becomes second nature. So you don't have to think about the way that you're whisking the eggs in the pan in order to get that fluffy, sort of silky French, shirred egg, as opposed to a scrambled egg, right? Not that there's anything wrong with that, but there's a level of, there's like, it's leveling up, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that's the thing. But in creating a polymath, do you think that this podcast is not content heavy enough? It's more about a feeling, isn't it?
Because I don't know. We'll get feedback from our...
Well, because, the thing is...
3 viewers.
Right. I mean, who listens to this? They're just on thinking about other stuff anyway. No. But there's this thing that's happening in the world, which is that there's so much information, and you have to learn how to sift through information, and you have to learn how to manage information. And there's this term that I'm learning, which is about being a knowledge worker. In other words, someone who manages content. So this is sort of a new-ish thing, right, for people who are content creators for YouTube and whatever, right? But homeopaths have always been in this space.
Yes,
right?
Totally.
So we have had to manage content from the beginning. That's how Hahnemann started an index that ultimately became a repertory.
Well, talk about skills, knowledge, and attributes.
Exactly.
I've been ranting for decades that homeopaths are information managers, right?
We totally are.
Yeah.
So what we have to do is we really have to think about this, and I think we need to help our students learn how to master information management. We, for the first time in all the years that I've been teaching homeopathy, and I'm going to say it's probably the same for you, we got the first ever glowing positive feedback about the therapeutics and Materia Medica notebooks from Bella. Right?
I don't think that was the first glowing feedback.
No?
No, it was glowing.
Yeah. Oh, was it the first?
But it's certainly not the first time that people have seen the value of that.
No. So let's explain. So one of the first semester assessments that are or assignments or portfolio assignments that AHE students do is they create a therapeutics notebook. In other words, gathering of information seen through the lens of a therapeutic it's a reductionistic exercise in you've got a named condition, differentiate the top remedies that address that therapeutic indication. So all the cough remedies you're going to differentiate. And you'll have anywhere from 3 to 5 symptoms. You're not going into the full expression of materia medica. It's what you put your stew in the refrigerator, what rises to the top, that's the fat, that's what you need, that's what you're going to capture. Then they have a materia medica notebook, and that's gathering a much broader view of a remedy. So you're looking at a remedy in its entirety. And these two notebooks done together help students to differentiate what's important in a remedy. So when I teach the remedy phosphorus, right? So you teach a full remedy. Well, all the remedies start to seem the same. Everybody has diarrhea. They're all constipated. How can they be both constipated and have diarrhea? Right? Your head explodes. But what happens is, and I demonstrate this when I teach phosphorus, is I ask the class, how many times have you seen phosphorus in your therapeutics lectures thus far? And all the hands go up, even the non-Hermiones. Oh, I saw phosphorus in my post-surgical therapeutics for excessive bleeding. Oh, I saw phosphorus was in upper respiratory. It was in uncomplicated, respiratory. It was in digestive. All of a sudden, you've got 15, things that you know about phosphorus. And you know what rises to the top because that's what phosphorus does in a clinical setting, right? And so this idea of helping people to learn in this very systematic way by doing things over and over again means when you have those skills down pat, you don't have to think about them. When you get in the car, you know how to put your directional on.
Your flicker?
The flicker. Except your indicator, except when you're doing your driving test and did you put the wrong one on or you put the windshield wiper on?
I put the windshield wiper on.
And you still got your license, so that's good.
Have we talked about that?
I don't know. I think we did. I think we did. Anyway, so putting this back into polymath territory, right? Because, Aristotle says the whole is more important than the sum of its parts.
Oh, always.
Always. And studying homeopathy requires us to get beyond that. You have to learn those individual things, though. You can't just learn this big whole giant concept. Yeah. You've kind of, in order to be effective in learning homeopathy, you have to learn all the little parts. And then you're starting to make these connections. Yeah. So for example, when we teach semesters 3 and 4, I'm just thinking about some of the topics that I teach, right? Semesters 3 and 4 are all about integration of information. It's taking high-level concepts and applying them. So you could do this in materia medica, and you could say, the halogen remedies. So for those of you geeks out there, the periodic table, it's the second row in from the right. You've got your noble gases on the far right, and then the next column in are your halogens. Okay, so the halogens, which include, bromine and iodine and chlorine, right? Those elements feature prominently in the sea creatures because the sea creatures are steeped in that environment because that's what makes up water in the various sea waters, right? So all of a sudden you've got a crossover in your knowledge of materia medica, a logical crossover between, say, the mineral, remedies, the halogens, and the sea creatures. So you've moved beyond a reductionistic kingdom first, top-down idea that puts you into a rigid framework, and you are learning by association. Right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so let's say, can we take it one step further, right? Let's say that you find yourself recognizing attributes of some halogens. Maybe you're thinking about natrium muriaticum, right? And the muriate is the chlorine part of that remedy. And then you go, well, that's interesting, but this client has some, it's really female hormonal oriented, jump into the C into sepia. And then you say, well, it doesn't really cover it, but what are some other female hormonal remedies that perhaps exhibit similar symptoms? Yeah. But maybe it's in the plant kingdom. Right? And this building of a web of connections is what you have to do in order to become a good homeopath. And so part of what I think we're doing really well in the way that we're teaching is not just to have the architecture of the curriculum that ends up with all these connections in semesters 3 and 4, but introducing students to them in their chronic clinic in their first, second, third week or whatever. So that what's happening is, even though they might not be able to solve a case and understand the miasmatic predisposition and why you absolutely had to go with a particular type of remedies, right? When they're going, but it looks like sulfur or whatever, right? But you're putting information into your memory bank, or you're building that web of connections, even though you might not know what to do with it in the beginning. That's, I think, how we grow to be a polymath. What do you think? You're just staring at me.
I am, because I'm somewhat inspired.
Do tell.
Because I think that's not me slurping, by the way.
That's me pouring from my thermos of mushroom coffee.
Oh, you and your shrooms.
Talk about a web of interconnectivity. Oh my gosh. The Merlin Sheldrake book?
Yeah. It's a good one, isn't it?
Everyone should get it.
No, I'm just sitting here and half thinking to myself that 2 of the projects that I have not been inspired to continue, that I've done quite a bit of work on, relate to the learning of homeopathy and the education of homeopathy.
That's the last book in the series. Except
what I've created in terms of structure, this is, boring for podcasters, but, when you've a quarter written a book and then you stop, it's for a reason.
Right.
And it's because I think I've not been approaching it from the perspective that you're talking about, and that is, what's the end result? And the end result is something which is truly holistic. And
Absolutely.
I don't think that there's a lot of educational resources and materials around creating a holistic product, a holistic thinker, a polymath.
Oh, that's what most of the homeschool classical educators are doing. That's why those folks are so successful in homeopathy education. Because they're learning from a classical perspective.
No, wait. You're not. You're.
Oh, sorry. Did I misunderstand you?
No. You. Sorry. I'm just made another couple of jumps. Which is, are you saying that there is literature in the Montessori, Steiner, homeschool?
Well, I think classical, education.
Yeah. I don't know what that means. To me, that means, let's learn about the Greeks.
Well, yeah. And so what were the Greeks? I just used a quote from Aristotle, right? So what is Aristotelian thinking about? What did that lead to? I mean, think about when you're doing research. This is what I love about the internet, right? This is why, okay, we can say what we must about Wikipedia, but let's sort of view it in a positive perspective for now, forgetting the crap they say about homeopathy. But the idea, and again, I'm leaving out sort of the crowdsource idea of knowledge creation, right? And open source materials. But what's really interesting is hyperlinking to more knowledge. Yeah? So this idea that as you're studying something, there's a natural connection to something else that leads your brain to understand another deep thing. This is sort of the example that I was using in the Materia Medica idea of connecting things to one another. Right? So it's about associative thinking as opposed, it's intersectional thinking. It's not, okay, I'm going to study the anatomy of a cell and cellular function, and I'm going to focus on the mitochondria and, getting down to smaller and smaller things. It's more like I just mentioned Merlin Sheldrake, right? He's the mushroom guy. When you start to think about where we are as a society and with information coming at us, right? It's really interesting. Okay, now I'm going to go off a little bit. Is that okay?
I mean, how am I going to stop you?
Good point. No, but so what's the idea of being a polymath, right? Why does it matter? Because information isn't linear, our lives aren't linear, and problem solving isn't linear.
I mean, it's the end result of inquisitiveness.
It is, but you have to manage that information, right? And you have to have the little bits and bobs and then they have to make logical connections to something bigger. And so let's just play this through in how homeopaths and the way that homeopaths think can wind up solving bigger issues, okay? So I mentioned the example of pans and pandas before. And I mentioned that, okay, there's connection to, an infectious pathogen, a bacteria, solved in the allopathic reductionistic world by antibiotics. A homeopath or a natural medicine practitioner would say, well, that's going to mess up the gut biome, and that's going to create an even bigger problem. And then they would say, well, then you've got not just the gut-brain connection, but you also have organ system relationships. Go to an ancient Chinese way of looking at it, and you have skin, lung, gut, and brain, right? Okay, so now let's take that and say, I'm putting this into the biggest picture, sort of how homeopaths might think. So as many of you know, part of my study of the history of homeopathy and Hahnemann's influences in the development of this system of medicine have to do with medical alchemy, which I call the third path of alchemy. You've got the molecular or the, sort of production of gold, transmutation of metals. You've got the sort of spiritual, the later ideas in alchemy. And then you've got sort of the blending of the two, which is this medical alchemy idea. Okay. So a lot of alchemy, this idea of as above, so below is one of the core tenets. In other words, everything in the human, right? We are the same as a star. We are made up of the same core materials as a star. So, and we are God, right? God is within us. So that's a very two-dimensional way of looking at it.
We have to get back to the garden.
I used to play that song when I was teaching that. Anyway, but what we can also look at is we can say, what if we take it from a two-dimensional experience, as above, so below, and make it into four, adding as within, so without. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, the gut biome and our relationship to the bacteria, to the fungi, to viruses, requires us to ask a completely different set of questions about our existence and the interconnectivity of us and all other things. Yeah? Now, that's a great conversation for homeopaths to have.
Well, it's a great conversation, but now just kind of ground it a bit, because what does that mean practically? Are you saying that with those perspectives above, below, in and out, that we've now got a whole lot of really solid health solutions to kids with pandas? Well,
it allows us to ask a series of questions in a different way. It gives us a completely different framework. So if we say that, if we continue on this example of pandas, it's in within, without, all of a sudden terrain theory, right? We can ask the questions. Now, let's take this, though, within, without, and say, what's a bioreductionistic, simplistic solution that gets overused in homeopathy? How do you fix those problems of terrain and the gut?
Bowel nosode.
They give a bowel nosode, right?
Right.
That's a bioreductionistic solution to a much more complex, higher-level question. Why would you even do that? I mean, sometimes it solves the problem. It's one tool. It's one possibility. But if you go at it, right, from just a very reductionistic paradigm, you're always going to end up with a reductionistic solution. This is why people are giving, well, give the nosode for that. Give the SAR code for that. It's bioreductionistic. So that's not polymath thinking. That's trying to get homeopathy to fit into the bioreductionistic paradigm.
You're essentially saying that folks that are enamored of protocols in homeopathy, it's ultimate reductionistic thinking.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So it's reductionistic.
And reductionism works for a time.
Well, right, yeah, because every now and again you...
Thank God I got antibiotics for the toe. I'd be dead.
Yeah.
So it works for a time. It's fine. It's good. Short-term solutions. Allopathic medicine is not bad. And there are actually some great parts to it. and some great thinkers. When I'm talking about the sort of reductionistic paradigm in the system, I'm talking about sort of how difficult it is to make change in the behemoth of a medical system that's built around an infrastructure, like giant buildings that were built in a certain way and all the machinery and so forth that goes into it, not to mention all the financial incentives and pharmaceuticals and insurance companies. It's like it's a part of a system. But if you extract it and you say, okay, homeopaths have to solve a problem, right? We could say, okay, we're just going to back ourselves into that system. But no, that's not the way to really solve the problem. Mm-mm. It would be great to get enough people in to start to make some change, to be able to use homeopathy. I think as many people as we get using homeopathic remedies to solve problems, even if they're not doing it at the highest level, is going to make an impact.
See, one of the things that you're saying, I love what you're saying, but I'm also thinking to myself, how on earth is there a significant future for homeopathy in a significant part of a public healthcare system when you're saying that you've got to be a polymath to actually be any good? Well, hang on. First, are you saying that?
Well,
and then I'm thinking to myself, how on earth do you get that into a healthcare system?
So, gosh, that's a big question. But I think I'm up for it.
You are.
I am.
Can I just describe what happened then? Denise's sort of sandy brown eyes lit up. And she went, yeah. All right.
Okay, so there are a couple things. One is, like, if we start at the bottom and we work our way up to the top, right? Because not everyone's going to be a polymath. But I think most people can learn to practice homeopathy, and there are going to be different gradations of it. So for some people, learning to do really good acute prescribing is all they want to do. That's all they need to do, right? Okay, we had an amazing student, Romy, right? Romy, who is a doctor of
TCM.
Yeah, she's a traditional Chinese medical practitioner. She studied with us for a year. She wrote I think the nicest note I've ever gotten. She said she doesn't feel like she's called to practice homeopathy beyond the acute level because she's working so deeply in her Chinese medicine. And that was good. That's perfect. Are you kidding? She's become a polymath. She's already got this knowledge, and she wants to apply homeopathy as it's appropriate within her existing realm. There are some people that just, they're a mom at home. They're or they have another job. They're really interested in homeopathy. They want to learn some basic acute prescribing, or they want to work with another homeopath, whatever. Okay, that's fine. But I think, actually, that there's a way that we can get homeopaths, most people who are interested in doing the whole thing, right, in putting the work in, if we teach them well enough, they can solve complex problems that plague humans in the 21st century. It can be taught. But we have to move outside of sort of the ways that we've been taught to learn and the language that has infiltrated all thinking for, we say since Galen. I think a lot of it goes back even further, but mostly since Galenic medicine.
Yep.
But then there's the way that we have to solve bigger problems, right? And the kind of holistic way of thinking that homeopaths do can create the next level of how we do medicine.
So is it actually, does it manifest in the world actually naturally at the moment where you've got your elderly statesmen and women and wise women and wise blokes of homeopathy who are the ones that you send the really, really, really complex cases to? Is that the way that it kind of functions?
And that's one of the ways.
Yeah.
And, and thinking about the system, we've got to get people who are in the system as it is, understanding homeopathy, using homeopathy, so that we can start to make change from the inside. Like, it has to happen on many levels. It doesn't just happen. It's not like, okay, we're going to change the world. All right, here's our 4-step plan. It's like anything, right? But now getting into sort of, where are we in the world and in human evolution, just look at what's happened in technology in the last 100 years, the last 50 years, the last 25 years. I used to think about my grandmother who was born in 1901, right? In the time of her life, she went from living in 1901, to seeing automobiles, to, telephones and airplanes. My grandmother was sitting one time on the porch of my uncle's beach house, and she's looking out at the horizon, right? It's like on the beach, she's looking out, and she says, with her great accent, "I wonder if they know what's on the other side." And everybody looked at her, and it's like, where you came from, But she couldn't even fathom that. I'll never forget trying to explain to her a fax machine.
Right.
Right?
Do you remember that story about Montefiore?
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
we couldn't do justice to it. But now look at that. So that was in, she lived to be 96, 95. The amount of what changed in the world in her lifetime is now compacted, right? We used to think, when I was in college, I remember taking computer science class, and you'd have to go into the room where the UNIVAC machine lived, and it was freezing. You'd wear a coat in there. And now you can have a smartwatch. Not me, because I got an Apple Watch because I love tech, and it burnt a hole through my arm. Remember that?
I do.
Yeah.
But it didn't burn a hole through your arm.
Not through my arm.
You are somewhat exaggerating.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Right, but so think about this. This
tendency to hyperbole.
I'm Sicilian. It's part of my nature.
Yeah.
So, but think about how things are speeding up now. We have to catch up with that, and as homeopaths, the sort of the hyper dissemination of information, we're sort of equipped for that, right? And now we have to help the next generation to manage it. And so if things are moving in this really at this really fast pace, think about AI. So we look at the medical system, we can look at it and say, well, that's the old way of doing it, but it's not just going to disappear one day. All the sort of parts that don't work will disappear. It's going to be time. But what if, as these things are all speeding up, sort of the idea of nanomedicine and the idea of, the minimum dose or the infinitesimal dose in homeopathy all of a sudden converge, right? So we need to be prepared. You're just staring at me today. You're not saying much.
No, I'm contributing. I think I'm contributing quite nicely, thank you. But I'm not sure that I'm on board with the last part.
Yeah.
I think because you're talking about digital technology, and in addition to that, I think there's a much broader conversation to have about adoption of technologies.
Yeah.
And so I was just reflecting on whether I was agreeing with you that things were speeding up. There are different ideas around.
Well, the world is speeding up, though. You know what I mean? Evolution is speeding up. That whole idea that we've stepped into a new age and evolution is speeding things up. And, we've got to be prepared for that. It's next level, man.
Like I said, where's my wife? Having a staycation is good for you.
Yes.
Are we done? I think so.
Do you think we're going to train a bunch of polymaths this year?
I think we're going to start off with that. And I've got some work to do now because I want to get some ideas down in my notebook about a restructure of my stalled...
Oh, book 7.
Book 7.
I love it.
Me too.
That's good.
All right.
This has been fun. It's been weird.
It has actually been fun. We came upstairs and I thought we were going to be talking about systems in homeopathy. And meaning,
Oh, right.
all of that stuff. And we didn't even get there.
But you know what? Maybe we can close on that. Maybe we can finish that up real quick. 1 minute close up, and we could talk about it next time. But the idea of systems in homeopathy is around, there are contemporary thinkers who have sort of developed their own systems, which sometimes become offshoots that are far removed from sort of the core piece of homeopathy. And we've talked so much about that I'd like to kind of shift our conversation now into how do we sort of look at each of those for the potentiality or the ways in which they're helping us to think about ideas that maybe, for example, people who are mapping out natural systems and so forth, right? That work isn't for naught. It's just we have to then tie it back to sort of the really core, tenets and premises in homeopathy. And sometimes when you do that, you have to let go of some things. Like, for example, in Schulten's work, if you've got a proving, then get rid of the speculative information, right? It's like you have to keep renewing the information. Yeah. So maybe that's something we talk about next time.
All right.
Let's do it. It's been fun. It's been weird. High five.
See you later, folks.
See you folks later.
Bye.
Bye.
AHE is changing the face of homeopathy education by raising the bar through rigorous academics and unparalleled clinical training delivered live through the soulful use of cutting-edge technology. AHE prepares its students to become fully rounded homeopathic practitioners from anywhere in the world. Apply today at ahe.online.